That is, I mean, that's a big piece of evidence right there. Because if Melly was in the car and there was a drive-by shooting, he would have gotten hit. If you got stippling, that ain't happening from outside the car.
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer. Why is that important? It's because I give you a perspective from a real flippin' trial lawyer. I try cases. I've been doing this for 25 years. And I'm board-certified by the National Board of Trial Advocacy and by the State Bar Association of Minnesota as a criminal law and a criminal trial specialist. It's a designation that shows a distinction and expertise in the area of criminal law. It's what I do. And I'm here with our content genius and my pearl handle pistol cufflinks. And today we're going to react to Melly. This is more Melly trial update. And we're going to talk to you about the science. And we're going to talk to you about an expert who talks about the trajectory of the bullets and why that's so important in this case and how it fits with the other evidence in the case. But before we get to that, ESign.com is an effective way to remotely do business. You know that, right? And you know the struggle I've been having with my grandparents. Well, I'm going to tell you, I've got great news. I got Grandpa into treatment, and he cleaned himself up, and he was offered a huge record deal. He's a rapper now. He's a little bit on the drill scene, but they won't let him out of inpatient. So what we had to do is we had to have the agreement e-signed over to my grandpa, and then he signed it by ESign, and we got the deal done. And now you're going to see my grandpa all over YouTube and everywhere because he is the newest and the oldest drill guy out there. I heard he's probably going to be in the XSL freshman this year. So ESign.com, you download the app, you get 3 free signatures a month. I use it all the time when I have a client out of town or somebody that can't come to the office, or if you want to do a deal quickly, like getting on XSL freshman with my grandpa, you do ESign.com, because if it's not ESign, no one signs. Okay, so here's the deal. So we know let's just back up a little bit. Who's driving the car? Borland, right? And then the Sack Chaser and Williams they're in the passenger seat in the front and rear. And then we have Melly is in the rear driver's side seat. How do we know that? Because there's video of him getting in the car in that position. Why is that important? It's important because that's where the two guys were found. Now, we're going to watch a couple videos here of the state's expert, and I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of analysis of why this is important and what happens later.
So this resting angle in this seat, you have the projectile coming in.
Now, first of all, look at that view. That is eerie. That's an eerie view because that really puts you in the back seat of that car. And one of the things about being a trial lawyer is it's all about communication. It's all about message. It's all about telling a story. And giving that viewpoint right there, that's powerful.
Exiting through the top of the skull and then continuing through the windshield.
You said windshield.
The window.
Can you say that it was at the top of the window, or the bottom of the window, the middle of the window?
I cannot.
So based on that projectile and the blowback, you can make what opinions?
And here's the other thing. Opinions generally aren't allowed unless you're an expert, and you have to be qualified as an expert. And you can opine when you're an expert on the area within which you're qualified.
So based on the angle of this this projectile, the blowback is indicative of a firearm being in close vicinity of the head.
That's important for a couple of reasons. But if you look, that is the angle that they're saying that Melly, that's really powerful when you look at that. I'm sure there was some pre-trial litigation about the state using this as a demonstrative exhibit. Demonstrative means just not the real thing. This isn't what really happened, but this is something to aid the jury's decision making.
The head is something that bleeds profusely when it's pierced. If you've ever fallen on stairs or hit your head, it bleeds like no tomorrow. And because the projectile entered in right below the skull, the blowback ended up coming in the direction of, as I was speaking earlier about the hose, in the direction that it came from. And you will get that with a very close shot. That blowback then proceeded after the shot. It went up, it hit this headliner, and continued and falling into the back seat.
What does that mean? That means when they find that .40 caliber, it couldn't have come from outside the vehicle.
And so I want to go to some of the other photos. There's a yellow jacket that's found in the very back of the vehicle. Is it important to know whose DNA and blood was found on that?
What yellow jacket?
Let me come back to that because I have the other photos, so we'll come back to
Okay.
that in a moment. Okay, so in terms of the location of the firearm that fired the shot, and we were just talking about in CSW 6745, does this attempt to accurately recreate the potential location of that firearm?
So the purpose of this photograph is strictly demonstrative.
And what he's saying is that you can't tell exactly where that firearm was, but you know it was behind the individual.
To show where once the projectile enters into the head, you're going to have the blowback, which again will come up, strike the headliner, and then continue. It's actually continuing this way and landing back here behind the driver in this area of the vehicle.
In terms of the driver and the t-shirt that he was wearing, do you take into account the location of the victim's DNA on his shirt?
Well, based upon the blowback pattern up here, I would expect to find some blowback here if on a driver, if a driver was there.
Okay, Sergeant, you can answer that.
One of the things they do is they see these. This is kind of confusing just at first glance, but what this is these are dowels that show the trajectory of the bullets that were fired.
Why don't you restate your question, Master?
So you were discussing that how you would find and determine angles and ranges for specific individuals that are presented to you.
Yes.
How would you do that?
So I would obtain a shooting height, a maximum, what we would determine as a maximum shooting height, which would be standing with your arm out at 90 degrees. That height would be obtained from the ground to your arm, to your finger essentially. And then a minimum shooting height, which would be squatting with the same arm out and measurement from here to your finger. And then that would give me a minimum and a maximum range of fire. Once I have a minimum and maximum range of fire, that gets added into more trig to determine a minimum and maximum distance of that particular shooter.
So it sounds like technical and it sounds boring and sounds whatever, but it's really important because based upon the trajectory of the bullet and the math that they do here, they can tell approximately how far the person was away when the shot was fired. But there's more to it.
So with regards to this incident, were you there on scene?
No.
Do you know who fired the shots?
No.
In terms of the shots to the outside of the vehicle, are you aware that individuals are already dead when those were fired?
They were already dead, yes.
They were already dead when those shots were fired. How in the hell does he know that?
How does that play into your reconstruction?
It comes into play because specifically with Christopher Thomas, because Christopher Thomas was already deceased when these rounds were coming into the back of the vehicle, because Christopher Thomas was what we would call crumbling. He was starting to fall, if you will. And on top of that, I know that he was already deceased because the back of his back, essentially, the rounds that are in his back, have no blood in them.
Why is that important? I'll tell you why it's important. So when you get injured, the reason that you're bleeding, the reason that blood comes out of you is because your blood, your whole system is under pressure, right? And so your heart is beating, and that's why you have blood pressure. So when you get an injury, your heartbeat is pushing the blood out of the opening. But if your heart's not beating, there's nothing to push that blood out. So if there's nothing to push that blood out, that's one of the ways, then that's how they can tell that if there's no bleeding from that wound. The only observation that you can make is that the heart must have been stopped. And if the heart's been stopped, with all the wounds that come from outside, it was not a drive-by shooting that killed him.
Which means that there's no circulation. So the rounds are coming in. Christopher Thomas is crumbling with each round. He's falling with each round, and that's the answer.
Okay. So in terms of, we'll get to the shooting inside the car in a little bit. I want to stick to the outside at this point. When you were looking at the side of the car on the angles of entry and the side-to-side angles that I'm talking about, why is that important in your analysis? I'm going to go back to 4809 to describe those angles.
So these angles are important because it is part of my assignment, which is to determine if this is a drive-by shooting. And my determination was that this is not a drive-by shooting.
Now you've got the experts saying it was not a drive-by shooting. How can he tell that?
And it's based upon this picture here, which is a very good picture to describe it. All of these rounds are done, and all but one is done at a stationary position. The shooter is at a stationary position when all but one of these rounds are going in. The one round that has some movement in it, which is round site L here, the shooter is actually moving in that to create the little bit of a keyhole that you see there.
Okay, a lot of information in that answer, so let's break it down a little bit. You mentioned a keyhole, so I'm going to zoom in on site L and explain what is a keyhole.
So a keyhole is a projectile comes out of the barrel and it is actually spinning in a line. It's also falling as it spins. However, once you add movement to the gun at the same time the projectile is coming out, you introduce that movement to the projectile.
This is why experts are so important in any trial for the defense or the state, because they talk about stuff that the lay people don't really know enough about. And you notice there are no objections because there's probably not a whole lot to object to here.
Once the projectile has altered movement, it will start to tumble. So it's no longer going in a straight line. It is actually going like head over feet, if you will. as it's entering into its target. And that head over feet gives you this right here, which is essentially the projectile coming in sideways.
And in terms of a drive-by shooting, if two vehicles were moving at 45 miles per hour, what would you expect to see?
So if it's a
So you hear what she said? If it was a drive-by shooting, say at 45 miles an hour, what would you expect to see?
drive-by shooting, all of these rounds should look like this.
Why?
Because movement is being introduced to that projectile.
And this is really huge for them to disprove that it's a drive-by shooting. Remember, Bortland said it was a drive-by shooting, and that's who shot, and that's how they died. And remember that the defense hasn't embraced that theory. In fact, they didn't even bring it up in their opening. Why not? Because they know it's bullshit. And so they're not going to hitch their wagon to that. You watch. They're going to hitch their wagon to, it was Bortland that did this.
Contrast site L with one of the other sites like U. What does that tell you?
So that's a shot that the shooter is stationary. The vehicle is stationary.
We've got some science about the angle, the characterization of the defects in the car, and now watch this.
Can you give an area of the car with which the shots emanated from?
Yes.
And could you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what area of the car did the shots that killed Anthony Williams emanate from?
From the driver's side back seat.
From the driver's side back seat. And where was Melly seen getting into the car? The driver's side back seat.
As to the shot that killed Christopher Thomas, where did that shot emanate from?
Driver's side back seat.
How can he make such an assertion?
Is it possible for there to have been two shooters inside that car?
No.
Why not?
No. How in the hell do you know that?
There is no time.
So explain what that means.
So Mr. Williams was not even aware he was about to be shot. When Mr. Williams was shot, Mr. Thomas puts up his hands and is shot, and then is shot again.
Okay.
There's no time for anybody to switch a firearm. If there were, I believe one of those individuals would be alive. There's no time to switch. It was a very, a rather rapid event of firing.
Okay. Can you say the length of time between the fatal shots and then the staged drive-by shots later on?
It was enough time for the heart to stop beating.
Remember? So that's actually an important point, because if you can show there's a separation between the shots that came from within the car and the shots that came from without the car, and that the death happened within the car that couldn't have happened outside the car, that's a very, very important fact for this case.
For there to be no circulation due to the wounds that I examined from the medical examiner's office, none of the wounds have any blood in them, which tells me that they're all ante-mortem wounds.
Well, he says ante-mortem here, but I think what he really means is post-mortem. It means after death. So ante-mortem actually means before death. Post-mortem means after death.
So the time was long enough for the heart to stop beating.
Okay. Is there scientific or medical testing to recreate that in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, it's knowledge. It's I'm sure the medical.
You know, and here's the thing. He sort of screws up here because he says ante-mortem, and you don't hear the defense trying to correct him, because the defense will likely use that mistake with the medical examiner to say, well, what does ante-mortem mean? And that means before death. And so what does post-mortem mean? It means after death. Then you're going to have, and if the state doesn't catch this, then you're going to have a hole in the state's case.
Sam could say the same thing.
So in terms of, it's nothing that can be recreated with a live human.
Correct.
In terms of the number of shots, you said 17 outside the car. How many rounds were fired inside of the car?
3.
And can you exclude the shots to the head for Mr. Williams and Mr. Thomas as coming from outside of the car?
Yes.
How can you do that? How can you exclude those shots to the head from being shot outside the car?
How can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury that, for example, shot that was marked as H in the, here, let's go to 6755. How can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that shot H is not the one that wound up in the face of Mr. Thomas?
Because Mr. Thomas is already crumpling at this point, and he is actually he's in the clear, if you will, of site H.
How can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that site H is not the shot to the back of the head of Anthony Williams?
Because site H continues and strikes Anthony Williams in the shoulder.
In terms of site K, the one that goes completely across the car, how can you tell that no one was sitting in the rear driver's side seat when that bullet came through the car?
That is, I mean, that's a big piece of evidence right there. Because if Melly was in the car and there was a drive-by shooting, he would have gotten hit.
It would have hit their legs.
Was there any sign of blood or anything on that seat?
There were signs of blood on the seat, yes.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what is Blue Star? You've talked about it a little bit.
Blue Star is a chemical that is used in forensics. It's very similar to what most people know as luminol.
What's the difference between the two?
Luminol is a very caustic chemical, and it's not really healthy to use. It's effective, but it's not really healthy to use. Blue Star accomplishes the same thing. It still detects.
The science of this stuff is actually pretty interesting, and it can be pretty exacting. I would assume that the state would have their own experts, or the defense would have their own experts to counteract some of these conclusions about where the shots came from.
Blood diluted up to 100,000 times, and it's not caustic.
Oh.
So it's attracted luminol and Blue Star. They're both attracted to the Hemi group of blood, primarily iron, and it will detect trace amounts of blood even after it's been washed. So if you have blood on your shirt and you throw it in the wash and throw it in the dryer and then hand it over to me, I'm going to tell you to put it back in the wash because there's blood on it still.
Okay. What if it's been 5 years?
You'll still get that result.
Okay. And what type of result are we looking for?
We're looking for blood.
And so what does it look like if there is blood?
So if there is blood, and that's the other difference between luminol and Blue Star. With luminol, the illumination of the luminescence of the blood, the Hemi group, is not as bright, and it is not as lasting. So you have to be very quick with your photograph in order to get it. With Blue Star, it is very bright, and it's lasting, so it's long enough for us to get a photograph of it multiple times, and if we need to, we can come back and squirt it again and duplicate the result if we're not happy with it.
So this testimony is dry a little bit, right? But it is so pivotal, and it is right where the rubber meets the road. You saw the inside of the car, you saw everything, dowels and the trajectory. This testimony is very, very critical to the state's case.
Our photographs.
Okay. In terms of the luminol, does that destroy the DNA?
No,
Okay. Does Blue Star destroy DNA?
no.
So is there a version that the sheriff's office uses now? More so than the other? Is there a preference?
We primarily use Blue Star.
So, and here's the other thing he testified. We'll put a couple of clips in here. He was able to tell, well, first of all, you know where the injuries are because Thomas was shot in the face, in the cheek. But here's an even more important thing, and this is why each one of these little factoids build on each other. There's a thing called stippling, and stippling is, basically the gunpowder coming out of the end of the gun. It comes out hot, and it forms an injury on the skin if it's shot in close range. It could be anywhere from 0 to 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 feet, but not really that far. Usually it's close range. And so if you got stippling, that ain't happening from outside the car. You would not get stippling on a wound if the bullet was fired from outside the vehicle. You just wouldn't get it. You've got a mountain of scientific evidence to show that they were shot from the passenger or from the driver's side rear seat. That the shots fired from outside the vehicle happened after Thomas and Williams were dead, and you have the trajectory showing that it was one shooter. Everything contradicts Bortland's statement to the cops when he went to the ER. Okay? And here's the thing. These guys are just... You think you can outsmart the science. You're not going to. You're just not going to. They put the phone in the hand of Melly. They put Melly in the back seat. And Melly's only device with which he can win this case, in my opinion, is if he hangs the jacket on Bortland. He's the one that went to the ER. He's the one that lied to the cops. He's the one that saw what happened. And so you're going to see down the road a little piece, them going after Bortland. And I bet you, I know I've said this, and I may be wrong. I may absolutely be wrong in this. And I know he's been putting positive messages up for Melly, but my guess is that he's going to testify to save his ass. He may not. I may be wrong, but I'd be shocked if he doesn't. So this has been our reaction to the expert testifying about the angles and about the trajectory and the bullet analysis provided by the state. We'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Make sure you subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, sign up for Patreon, and damn it, build. Don't do this kind of crap. If you're riding around dirty, if you're riding around with guns, do not do it. Think about other things you can do, because guess what? Sack Chaser and his buddy are dead, and these other two guys are facing life without parole and the death penalty. So we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. 23-hour lockdown, please, is that my God.